nice conversation with my brother Josh, which we do from time to time. Probably once or twice a week over the phone, we might talk about cars or about racing or about trying to buy a house. Occasionally, though, we share something that has given us some stress or freaked us out a little bit. And on Monday, he shared with me that someone at work had grilled him a little about his family and his faith. Now, you might be thinking, well, come on now, Josh, that's life. Be ready to give a defense. You should be thankful you had the opportunity that someone brought the conversation of faith to you. Now, you might be right, or even righteous in that thought, but for a moment, put yourself in his shoes. He's one of 4 pastors' kids who didn't get into professional, full-time ministry while the rest of us did. He's not married to a pastor or a teacher, and he fulfills his calling in life working for an AV installation company in Milwaukee. Conversations about why aren't you a pastor? Why are you a Christian? What is someone actually supposed to think about creationism or evolution or philosophical arguments about the existence of God and the problem of pain don't exactly cross his radar on a daily basis. So he was a little jarred that one of his coworkers who discovered some details about his family and all of a sudden wanted him to bare his whole soul to him. And the reason I bring this up is because maybe you would find yourself in a similar situation. I know that the last time someone really pushed me about my faith and wasn't simply reasoned into agreement by my all too winsome explanations, it freaked me out for a few days. And frankly, that wasn't that long ago. Sometimes we simply need a refresher. We need to go back to the basics. And these midweek services and these readings tonight to actually take us right there, to the foundational building blocks of faith. What are our basic premises? How do we see the world? And how do we see God at work in it? Well, we live in a world of relatively predictable cause and effect. God has built an environment where good behavior is typically rewarded with benefits, and bad behavior typically results in punishment or suffering. And almost every culture across the world in history has retained this basic structure of ethics. Even the ways we raise children and learn the underlying behavioral patterns of society are held together by that simple model. When you do good, good happens. When you do bad, bad happens. And I think that's a starting point most people agree with. And common ground is the path we often must take if our efforts to explain what we believe will have an impact. But there's one problem. What about when bad happens and there doesn't seem to be a good reason for it? What do you tell someone who has lost everything because of a market crashing outside of their control, or a C-level executive given the order to downsize or eliminate an entire department? How do you explain this in the face of even more shocking situations, when a fire burns up a house built on the wrong side of the road, an earthquake levels an apartment building, or a bomb hits a hospital? Who did something wrong to warrant that kind of bad? In times like these, as we sit and watch with horror the headlines on the newspaper, getting constant updates from the phones in our pockets, our watches buzzing with the latest tragedies, and with your news commentator of choice on the television reminding you that it's all headed downhill with the election in 2024, well, then Isaiah 60 verse 2 seems to make a lot of sense. See, the world is covered in darkness, and thick darkness is over the peoples. Doesn't that just about sum it up? Here's the issue, and I think here is why that reality tends to exhaust and exasperate us. We grow up with this expectation that the score starts out even, 0-0. No points on the board. As a young child, a youth, and in the early days of adulthood, we live what we think is a pretty good life. And if the goodness results in good in our lives, good families, good times, good home life, good job, good food, And we expect that most people are like us too, and are also pretty good. So we start to sound a little bit like the disciples in our reading from John tonight. Who did something evil that a man was born blind? The blind man or his parents? Divine retribution must be the answer, so tell us, Lord. We try to justify the evil or bad things to connect the dots for ourselves in our own little minds. Sadly, though, as we grow wiser, we begin to look back and realize and recognize that the score has never been even. My badness has always been prominent, from my trivial sibling rivalries to my selfish bargains with God, and even in my harsh judgments of others. And to make matters worse, the world is filled with far more bad than good, whether it be tragedy or crime, natural disasters, or the collateral damage of conflict. Things don't look good. The world is covered in darkness. Thick darkness is over the peoples, all of them, especially me. And that's our point of agreement number 2. So why do we bother with messages like Jesus cares even about your little tiny toes, and lift up your heads, you gates, the King of glory comes? Jesus came and went, and it still seems pretty dark out here. Why isn't the light still shining? But listen to these words again. From Isaiah, the sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. From John, Jesus spoke again to the people. He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Finally, from Peter, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Why doesn't it seem like the world is lightening up? Well, we are looking in the wrong place if we expect God to make a case for his reign by alleviating the suffering of the world according to our schedule or expectations. When we look to the world for light, we will always be disappointed. It's never been that way. Even when we look to the biblical characters themselves, we see that the human tendency to expect things how we want them is a thorn in the side of many. Who is to say that suffering alleviated according to our expectations would be understood by anyone else as such? Who am I to speak into the distant problems I see across the world as some kind of objective authority? Instead, I ought to pray for God's mercy on the oppressed, his relief for the suffering, and frankly, his strength for my faith. Now, you may be thinking, okay, not outside, but I simply must look in and see God's love inside me to appreciate the light. And that's not entirely wrong, maybe, but it doesn't really help, because you've cut off kind of the outside world. You rely on an imbalanced perspective to arbitrarily measure whether God is real and whether he is good. And as Martin Luther famously put it, this is a paraphrase, it could be the Spirit or it could be indigestion. In other words, we are unpredictable and less reliable than we think. Looking within can take us to some dangerous places. So if we can't look outside and we can't look inside, what are we supposed to do? Well, here's where our basics of faith begin to distance themselves from things most reasonable people would agree to. The world is dark? Sure. The need for help and hope and light is universal? Absolutely. We can only find that in Jesus? Isn't he the guy who was crucified? Didn't he get abandoned by his followers, killed by his people, buried in another man's tomb? Wasn't he hung on a cross and left to suffocate between two criminals? Doesn't sound like the kind of place or person help and hope and light might come from. But this is what God does. In the face of our limited perspective and ignorant expectations, he displays a wisdom and divine design far above what we might attain. He takes the cost of a dark world The price to be paid by a people covered in thick darkness, and recognizes how far he must go to pay it. To redeem the tiny toes of those plagued by sin, to once again bless the gates of the city of God and the hearts of his people, he lifts his Son up so that all would be drawn to him. Jesus' birth is the first step in a sequence of events leading to his death. And his resurrection and ascension are the first steps in a sequence of events leading to his return. This is the shining light. This is the day. God loves you to the point of losing his Son that he might gain the family that were lost. And with that in mind, in heart, with all our strength, what are we to do? Thankfully, Jesus is clear with the blind man. The sent one, Jesus, sends the blind man into a pool named Sent, so that he might walk in the light of sight. Where is that light to go? With Jesus. And you are his body. Where you go, he goes. Where he is, light is. Where light is, work is done, for it is day. You bring the light of Jesus to the world covered in darkness, to the people under thick darkness, not because you're such a nice person, not because you give so much to charity or are so kind to the under-equipped barista while you wait for your coffee. No, it is because you are the possession of God, elevated to the role of priest, a mediator between dark and light, bearing the bright joy of Jesus into the world, desperately searching for hope. From the tips of your little toes to the gate of your heart, every part of you is his and useful for his purposes. Ultimately, our heavenly home won't need the light of the sun or the moon, because God's tangible glory will illuminate all things forever. But in the meantime, don't waste away trying to earn a place on the list there or pressuring family and friends to prove their enrollment as a citizen of heaven. Instead, simply bear the light. Speak the word of Jesus through the gifts he has given you. Gifts of patience, of wisdom, of joy, gifts of hope and perseverance, gifts of tender-heartedness, even gifts of installing audio-visual equipment in Milwaukee. You have these gifts of God, and you know where they come from. Hope, peace, joy, and love, and they are available. You are a priesthood, adopted by the royal line of heaven, chosen by the maker of everything, and sent by the one who makes the dark go away. And he is alive. D.T. Niles was a Sri Lankan-born Methodist pastor who is famous for several reasons, but perhaps the most of all is this quote: "Evangelism is witness. It is one beggar telling another beggar where to get food." This Advent, consider your gifts and consider your calling. In a world of darkness imbued by a sinful nature, you carry the most wonderful vocation, the most critical calling of all. You bear the light that makes the night into day. You bear the light that makes it time to get work done. You are the ones sent by the sent one to shine the light of the glory of God in a dark world. While it is day, before Jesus returns and brings to a close our time for working, be about the work of him who has sent you.